Welcome to the Catherine Vandome and Me podcast.
Hello and welcome to Catherine Vandome and Me. And today's special guest is Paul Higginson, who has written this incredible book called Doing Christianity, and by Paul Higginson. And it's basically how religion is about what you do and not what you believe. So I've got my copy here, and I encourage everybody to go out and get one of these books. It's absolutely fantastic and so well written. And I also want to say that Paul Higginson not only is multi-talented, he's also my Uncle Paul. So it's with great pleasure I introduce today Mr. Paul Higginson. Hello and welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Cathy. Well, I am honoured to be a guest on the podcast. So thank you very much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you on here. It's a pleasure. So would you like to tell the listener a little bit, Paul? We're going to delve backwards and forwards and hear all about you and your life. Very exciting life. But what I want to do today is encourage you to just sort of, what was it that inspired you to write Doing Christianity?
I suppose, Cathy, as you know, I've been a teacher for 35 years. I've retired now, but and I taught RE during that time to lots and lots of different students in a sixth form college. And I suppose when I retired, and I retired during COVID, I just thought now's an opportunity to jot down all the ideas that I'd learned, I suppose, over the years, particularly from my students. I taught in a multi-faith school. About 25% of the students were Hindu, about another 15% Muslim, and the rest were Christians. So it was a fantastic environment, really, to learn a little bit more about what religion's all about. So I thought this is a chance for me to, during COVID, during lockdown, to get all these ideas down. So that's what started me off with the book, really.
Fantastic. So when did you actually start writing it, Paul, and how long did it take you to complete?
I suppose I started when we had the first lockdown, and I suppose it took about 4 or 5 months to actually write it. I was writing every day because there was nothing else to do, really. And then after that, it was a case of, tweaking it and rewriting bits and doing a bit of editing and so on. So I suppose the whole thing took about a year, really, from start to finish.
Wow. Well, that's incredible, because book writing, as I know, which is close to my heart as well, is something that's very, very complex, and you've made it sound so simple. And I do hope that the way that you have sort of suggested that you write a book inspires others, because we've all got a book in us. But this particular book is very, very special because it does transcend everything that I know about you, Paul, and I'm sure there's a lot more I don't know. And I want to hear today a little bit about going back to your youth. If you'd like to start there, was there anything in your youth or anybody in your youth that sort of inspired you to go in the direction you did? Because obviously you had a fantastic career, but we'll start in young times. Where did you go to school, Paul, and where are you from? Obviously.
Oh, yeah, I'm from Preston, as you know, and went to school at the Preston Catholic College. Went to school first of all at primary school, St Anthony's in Fulwood, which is a Catholic school, and then later went to the Catholic College. But I suppose, Cathy, looking back at that time, religion was very much about sort of hellfire and brimstone, really, and people went to church, I think, out of a sense of maybe a bit of fear, maybe a bit of duty, parental pressures and the pressures of society, really. And so I suppose, my early years was a case of going to church because of the culture that I was in, rather than because it maybe kind of resonated with me on a sort of deep personal level. And really, it was when I went to university, I think, Cathy, that I sort of met people and came into contact with the chaplaincy at university, and that kind of got me thinking a little bit more deeply about what my faith meant and whether or not it was something that I could spend the rest of my life pursuing, rather than this kind of almost indoctrination, really, I suppose, which in those days was quite common certainly in sort of Catholic schools, you know. So that was you know, how I started, and then from university onwards, I sort of developed an interest in deepening things a bit further as a result of, you know, some of the wonderful people that I met at university and the chaplaincy there.
Am I right in saying you started as an altar boy, so that we can give a flavour to the reader, because we want to sort of transcend what got you into it, what then inspired you to write it, and how you retain your youthful looks. Those are the things the reader wants to know.
Well, I'm not sure about the youthful looks now. They are beginning to fade a bit, Cathy, as you can see from this video. But yeah, I mean, I was an altar boy, you know, from an early age. But that's what you did, you know. It wasn't so much. I mean, when I was older, I used to run confirmation classes in the parish. I now live in Bushy, which is in Hertfordshire, and I used to run confirmation classes. And you know, when we're young, we you know, it's what our parents want, isn't it? You know, we're given a sort of faith background because of our parents. We get baptized because of our parents, and you know, you don't have a choice in that. I didn't have a choice. We have, as you know, Catholics have infant baptism, and you don't necessarily have a choice in that. So you know, it's only later on that you get to think, well, I need to confirm this. I need to make this real in my own life. And so, yeah, I was an altar boy. And when I was at primary school, we used to have mass at 4 o'clock every afternoon at St. Anthony's, and we were all encouraged to go.
So this was every day, Paul. Every day you went to church. So am I right in saying you had a good faith? Because my nana and grandpa, which is your mum and dad, Lily and Bill Higginson, to give them a mention, they obviously inspired you in that respect, because not everybody chose to be an altar boy. So what I'm getting a flavour of is that this was something that was an innate passion, a feeling that you had, and perhaps a closeness that you've revealed in the time I've known you to God, that is very, very strong, a strong bond, possibly from an early age? Or are you suggesting that the religion side was a little indoctrinated, but the spiritual side was raw and real? How do you feel about that from a little boy's perspective?
I think I definitely felt there's something there, but it was never, Cathy, it was never something that I really sort of asked any deep philosophical questions about, because you know, you're young and you just do what you're told, and you know, we were going to mass because we were encouraged to go. But I think there was something pulling me towards a spiritual life, if you like. I definitely felt there was something pulling me, and otherwise I'd have gone to university and I'd have just not bothered with anything, you know. I'd just have gone down a different path. But so I suppose there was always something there that was pulling me towards wanting to find a deeper meaning, I suppose, to my spiritual life. And so, yeah, and you talk about my mum and dad, you know, they were very, you know, they were really great people, as you know, and they laid kind of foundations for me wanting to ask some more questions later on when I left home.
And was there anything significant, and I reflect forward to your book, still in your youth here, that happened that you remember and recall in the beginning of your book, talking about an incident with Nana, was it in the kitchen or something? Am I recalling that correctly? I have read it, you see.
That's right. Yeah, I bet you, Cathy, which is great. Yeah, I mean, there was my Nana we used to go and visit my Nana, who lived in Otway Street, which is just off Plungington Road there in Preston, and she used to keep a bottle of lemonade under the sink for us to, you know, to have a little treat when we went down there, and it was delicious, you know, really sugary and sweet and lovely, but it was flat, and because we never had lemonade at home, I always thought that is what lemonade tasted like. And I thought it was fantastic. And then it must have been the age of about 6 or 7. I went to my first ever birthday party at a friend of mine, and his mum said, "Would you like a glass of lemonade?" And I said, "Oh yeah, of course, that would be absolutely fantastic. I know what lemonade tastes like, and I like it." And this lemonade came out, and it was proper lemonade. It wasn't about 5 years past its sell-by date, and it was fizzy, and it just blew my socks off. And I just thought, wow, this is incredible. And I suppose it's when faith, it's when religion gives you that fizz, gives you that kind of sparkle.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
That you know, you kind of really think, yeah, this is something that I need to pursue a bit further. I need to examine a bit further. And it was, I mean, I use that analogy just to say that the fizz of faith, you know, sometimes our faith can become flat.
Yeah.
And I think for all, you know, for everybody, whether you're spiritual or not, you know, sometimes life feels flat. And, you know, I think faith and the spiritual path can give you the bubbles back, if you like, in your life.
Oh, that's, well, I like that analogy very much. I think the reader will as well. That's something that we can all resonate with. And especially, as you say, in your generation, treats and rations, not necessarily rations to the point that my nana had, your mother had, but certainly, well, our family, we weren't overfed, were we? So treats were rationed, which is a good thing, but also yeah, we really had that sort of upbringing. So I think that's fantastic. And is there anything else, any other stories in your youth that can inspire the reader? Because obviously we want to transcend anybody that's young who's looking at perhaps becoming an altar boy or an altar girl, or, you know, wondering what faith to choose, because obviously today we have cross spectrum of opportunities that perhaps, as you say, in our youth and your youth, you just went down one linear line. Is there anything you would say to anybody young listening today that might make them think, oh, actually, yeah, it's, you know, as your book says, it's not about the religion per se, it's about the spiritual aspects and doing good for others. I would say that's what this is about. Am I right?
Yes, I think you're right, Cathy. And I mean, I would say to young people that we all have to follow something in life, you know, whether you follow you know, a fashion icon or a football team, or, you know, later on perhaps a political party, or I mean on Instagram, you know, people follow, you know, people like Ronaldo and Messi and Kardashians. They have, you know, millions and millions of followers, and you know, you can follow money. You know, you can decide that your life, the purpose is about making yourself as rich as possible. So there's all sorts of things that you can follow. And I mean, all I'm saying really in the book is that, you know, Jesus has a philosophy which I think is worth following, and he is someone that I have found in my life is worth following, because, you know, his philosophy is about forgiveness, it's about love, it's about looking after the poor, you know, social justice. Jesus talks all the time. In his first sermon, if you like, in the first time he goes into a synagogue, he talks about widows and orphans, looking after widows and orphans. It's not highfalutin doctrine that Jesus is concerned about. It's helping people, and it's compassion and social justice. And those are paths that's a path, I think, that is worth following. And I suppose that's what the book is about. It's about not necessarily thinking, I've got to think stuff, I've got to have a set of beliefs in my head, which is, you know, it's about doing stuff. It's about putting into practice a way of life. And I suppose for me, Jesus has always outlined a way of life which is exciting and which is compassionate. You know, one of the things I researched in the book, which was quite a revelation, was about 2/3 of what Jesus says can be linked in one way or another to forgiveness. That's a massive part of his message. And if people could learn to forgive, you know, wouldn't it be such a different world if we could all forgive each other? You know, I'm thinking about, you know, war. I'm thinking about what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in the Middle East. You know, forgiveness was the essential strand, if you like, running through the whole of Jesus's teaching. And that's just one example of how, you know, we can have thoughts about forgiveness, Cathy. You know, we can say, yes, I believe in forgiveness, but it remains a thought. It's just a thought until you actually do something about it, until you actually start to forgive. You have to put into practice. Love is a great thought, a great idea, but until you actually start to love people, then that's all it is. It's just a thought, an idea, a doctrine, if you like. And so, you know, Jesus is incredibly practical. What he's saying is, this is a way of life which I know will bring you spiritual contentment. And he's saying, you know, have a go, you know, follow me. see what it's like, see where we end up.
Yeah.
Which is all he says to the disciples. You know, he doesn't say to them, look, here's a book of, you know, doctrines and rules and regulations, learn this and follow it. He just says, look, you know, come and see. That's his first words to the disciples are, come and see, follow me, see what see where it takes us.
Yeah.
So the book really is an invitation for the reader to kind of and I call it a virtual pilgrimage because it's split into lots of very small chapters, and you're supposed to read one a day. I don't know if you've done that, Cathy, but you read one a day over a period of time.
Okay.
It's a slow, you know, kind of pilgrimage that you can make without leaving home.
And I like the book because I wanted to dive in and I didn't know the rules of reading one a day. So I actually read a large chunk of it. Obviously, as you know, I'm indoors a lot anyway. So obviously I wanted to read it. And it was a page turner. So for me, that, you know, that would barricade me and block me because I wanted to see what happened next. But I do like the succinct way and style that an approach that you've used, Paul, because it isn't a hard complex read, which is important, but it has got a very insightful message behind it. So it is open to every single person to be able to read and digest what's inside. It's got quirky isms which are very much I hope our family, which are, you know, bounded by comedy and silliness, which is great. But it's got little isms, and as you say, the lemonade story, things that people will reflect and be able to, the average layperson will be able to understand. I just wondered if you felt some direct link, as you say, a pull, and whatever space we're in, whatever religion we're in, I always feel, and I've gone to multiple religions myself and different spiritual faiths, I always feel this innate, as you say, pull from inside. It's not an external thing, it's absolutely from inside. And I think that's also deepened in recent years with meditation, which I know that's something that you do. So how would you say meditation and faith perhaps link to each other, and is that a way that people can maybe get into it, Paul?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you talk about this pull, and I think for me a lot of that pull happened when I was just quietly on my own, not as a result of liturgy, but for me it was often in those really quiet moments where I was on my own, you know. And I mean, you know, Jesus says, doesn't he, in the gospel, you know, when you want to pray, close the door, go to your private room and just be with God. And so I think you're right about meditation, I think, and that's of course common across all, you know, religions, you know, this idea of meditation, this quiet contemplation. And I think it's really crucial. And I think we sometimes get hung up about meditation. We think we have to adopt a particular posture, or we have to say certain words, and then if something doesn't happen, we get I'm not doing it right, you know. And there's no such thing as bad meditation, in the sense, really. You're sitting quietly and you are leaving space for God to be with you, and you can do it. And I mean, I say to people, you know, if you struggle with it, just sit somewhere quiet. If you can look out the window, maybe at a plant or you know, a tree, and just be, you know, just accept that you're here, and just, you know, do some breathing exercises, but just look at stuff, you know. Really, that's all it is. And then, you know, you can close your eyes if you like, or not. But I think it's just stilling the mind in order to create space for you to appreciate this pull, this spiritual pull, if you like, that God has for us. And it was Blaise Pascal, who was a French mathematician and philosopher, and he said, wouldn't the world be different if we could all just learn to sit quietly in a room by ourselves now and again? A bit of meditation, a bit of quiet contemplation, and you would think differently, because, you know, it's a really important part. So I would, you know, urge anybody, just 5 minutes a day. Start small. You know, there's no good time, you know, not necessarily in the morning or the evening. Just sit quietly for 5 minutes. Bit of deep breathing exercises, and just see what happens. And don't get concerned if you think, oh, I can't concentrate on this. Just commit to 5 minutes a day and see what happens, see what it takes you.
Well, that's, yeah, wise words, Paul, there in terms of the meditation, because for me personally, I had years inside with my health issue, and I think the meditation for me has and will continue to be for the rest of my life one of the most valuable components, not just for breathing, in terms of deep respiratory breathing, more oxygen to the lungs, which is something we all need today, but also in terms of switching the mind off, which a lot of people in today's busy world, and certainly prior to my collapse in 2014, I was one of the fastest moving brain functioning people on the planet. I was very, very highly active. I never sat still, never rested, and high achiever and all those things. And I think, my rest time then was a Zumba class. So for the complete transition today, for my rest time now to be full meditation, and I mean, I can do it for a couple of hours, which I find some people say that's a long time to completely still the mind, but it's a practice. And I say start at 2 minutes just to start. Like writing a book, they say write one line and you've started.
Yeah, I was going to say about the connection between meditation and love, because a lot of people find it quite hard to love God. One of the things that all religions tell us to do is to love God, and we find it easier to love our neighbor. There's certain people around us that we can find really easy to love, but when we talk about loving God, a lot of people find that very, very difficult to do. And it's often a good idea during meditation, if you like, just to extend that love to whatever you can see. Whether you're looking at a tree, whether you're looking at a flower poking up through the grass, or a weed, or just the sky, or the rain falling down, or a pet, and just allow yourself to accept who you are, and to love the world in which we live, I suppose. Yeah. So what I think a lot of people struggle with is this idea of loving God, which all of the major religions tell us to do, and we find it quite easy to love someone that is close to us, a parent, a sibling, a child, but loving God people find quite difficult, and they often say, well, where do I start? How can I begin this process? One of the things I say in the book is, during meditation, possibly, which doesn't have to always be done with your eyes closed, just try loving what's in front of you, whether that's a tree, whether that's the sky, whether that's the rain on the window, perhaps a pet, and see where that takes you. Because one of the things that I say in the book is that God is in everything and everyone.
Yeah.
And he's either in everything and everyone. He's either everywhere or he's nowhere.
Yeah.
He has to, the whole of creation is infused with, by God and with God. And so by loving each other, the way we love God is by loving each other, and by loving the world around us, and by loving the natural world.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of people get a little bit hung up sometimes about the whole theology of this. And actually, all Jesus is saying really is, love your neighbor. When you feed your neighbor, you're feeding me. When you visit the prisoner, you're visiting me. When you visit the sick person, you're visiting me. So it's that idea about seeing God in everyone and everything. And I think that's probably the definition, my best definition of someone who is a spiritual person, someone who sees God in everyone and everything, because God's everywhere.
And I think that's very fruitful to say, Paul, because some of the meditations I do are sat up in the middle of a forest, and I do a lot of tree hugging as well. And I find that very, very emotive, and get a lot of connection there, because you're grounding yourself, obviously, from electric devices, which is positive, but you're also you're out there in the middle of the forest. And I think that's such a profound place to go, if anybody is considering, that's watching today, taking taking this opportunity, because I think sometimes in the constraints of our own homes, there's so much going on that if you start meditating in the kitchen, your wife might come in and put the kettle on. So I think it's nice, or husband. I think it's nice to to give people the opportunity, sitting on a bare log that's with the sun shining near trees in the middle of nature is a really wonderful way to spend a Sunday morning, certainly for me, for those people that are not inclined to go into church buildings, etc.
When I was teaching, I used to, I used to ask, a class who believes in God here, and perhaps half will put their hands up, and I then used to say, well, who believes in love? Who believes in the importance of love? Who believes that love is perhaps the most important thing about being a human being? And every hand would go up, and I would say, well, that's fine. If you're pursuing that path, it's that's all there is. I mean, for me, God is love, but we shouldn't get too hung up on names that we call God. Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists have different names for God and so on, and that's not important. One of the chapters in the book is entitled "God is not a Christian," and we have become quite tribal in the various different beliefs that exist in the world, and we just have to pull away from that, to pull away from all these doctrines and ideas and so on, and just concentrate on the doing. The book's called Doing Christianity, because everything is about the doing. And as long as people are following the path of love, as I would call it, whether or not they say Lord, Lord, Jesus says, you don't have to say Lord, Lord to be a follower of mine. So in a sense, you don't have to have a great theological outlook or have decided about all these different things. You just have to practice forgiveness, love, compassion, pursue social justice, and reject materialism. I mean, you were talking about ladders earlier on, and I quote Thomas Merton, who was a famous Catholic monk, and he says most of us spend our lives climbing the ladder of success, only to find once we reach the top that the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall.
Yes, and very valuable.
I think for many people, that life is about acquiring possessions rather than and status. You mentioned ego before, and feeding that ego as opposed to
feeding each other.
Life. In a way which is service to others. And today's Maundy Thursday, and later today the liturgy in the Catholic Church goes over Christ washing the feet of the disciples, and in a sense that's Jesus saying to us, you've got to serve. You've got to serve. It's not about ego. It's not about becoming successful in the eyes of the world. It's about washing the feet. In a sense, washing the feet of the disciples is the ultimate act of service, and one that they really didn't want him to do. They were really saying, no, we've got to wash your feet, and Jesus is saying, no, I'm going to wash yours, because that's a model of service. So I suppose that's the essence of what I'm saying there.
Yeah, that's a very, very well worded explanation for so many people, because I just think the word religion in some people can make the hair stand on end, because they're, as you say, they've potentially had a very indoctrinated past in a particular field. And I think often people change religion or change their spiritual leaning towards whatever resonates more so with them. And I think what you're saying is it's an all-encompassing thing. It's the spiritualism, it's within us. And I think lockdown, if nothing else, has taught us that we need each other. And as you said, you had that gap of time to write your book, which was very fruitful in terms of working on yourself and working on your faith and things like that. But ultimately, I'm sure you agree with this, human beings need each other to survive, and that is so important. And of course, we lost our churches in lockdown. We lost that unity. We lost that community sense.
When Jesus starts off, he doesn't ask the disciples to believe in anything necessarily. He asks them to belong first. It's about belonging to community. And you know, people sometimes, my students used to say, well, why do you go to church? And, you know, part of the answer, and I think part of the reason why, you know, I'm staying in a church, the Catholic Church, which in many ways is imperfect and in many ways is on the decline, as all Christian churches are. You know, as our organised religion is on the decline in the West. But the essential reason why I think, you know, I still go to church every week is because of the sense of community.
Yeah.
And I think a sense of community, a sense of belonging, is something that young people in particular have kind of lost. And you know, I was thinking about, you know, if you think about the mental health crisis at the moment, part of that is, I think, connected with sort of the isolation that a lot of people feel, a lot of young people feel. And the one great thing about belonging to a community and belonging to a group of people is that you know, theology doesn't matter, doctrines don't matter, whether you go to the mosque or the synagogue or the church or the temple, you are belonging to a community, and you're forging those links with other people, and you're providing opportunities for this service, for us to serve one another, and I think that's a really important part of religion.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, Paul. I think the community link is huge, absolutely huge. I mean, we were raised where there was tea and coffee after Harper's Date Mass. So me and my dad and I should say, were very sort of keen to go to that particular mass. But it wasn't just the tea and coffee. It was actually the social opportunity that you don't get within the mass. Where did you teach, Paul? Because I think that's a real qualitative part of your story.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I after I left university, I did a bit of social work for a while, working in mental health, and then I went to Japan for 3 years, and I taught English there, which was a wonderful experience. Yeah.
And how was that, Paul? How was that?
Oh, fantastic! Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, and those 3 years I spent there were wonderful because I did a lot of. I went to Zen monasteries and spent weekends, you know, meditating, which was fantastic. And then I came back and I taught in London.
And you also, can I just interrupt and say you also went to the Roehampton University, the University of Surrey, where I went. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And what did you study there, Paul?
Well, that was education, so that was a PGCE. So that's, you know, I wasn't trained as a teacher when I went to Japan, so I had to come back and do my teacher training. Which is where, and that's where I did that, and then I worked in teaching in a sixth form, then teaching RE and also teaching politics as well, A-level politics, which was fantastic, and that's my kind of career, really.
So you were teaching sixth form, and which whereabouts, Paul? Because
that was in Harrow. Yeah, it was called St Dominic's Sixth Form College.
So a big shout out to St Dominic's. Okay.
Indeed, yeah. Which was a great experience, and you know, absolutely tremendous college, just fantastic. Wow. And you know, the great thing was, as I think I mentioned earlier, you know, it was a multi-faith environment. So, you know, you would be in the chapel and you'd be praying and you'd look down and you'd see in the bench, there'd be, you know, a Christian next to a Muslim, next to a Hindu, next to a Sikh, next to a Buddhist, and, you know, all praying to the one God. You know, there is only one God. And, you know, to have the privilege of all being together, you know, worshipping the one true God in that setting, you know, it's fantastic. And again, I used to say to the students, you know, carry this with you, because, you know, the world is full of people killing each other for their faiths, you know, for their religious beliefs. And, you know, you've learned something here, which you've got to take with you into the world, because if only the world could see what's going on here and
how united you are. Yeah. And is that, would you say, and you know, knowing you as my uncle as well, I would say that was your backdrop. You're a very uniting individual. You're a very compassionate man yourself, and that will have transcended through your work. I'm sure you were incredibly popular there as a teacher. And were you a teacher throughout, or did you grade up in the system, or what was your position? So you were RE, religious education, and politics. Is that right?
And politics. And then by the time I retired, I was assistant principal, so I was
Oh,
dealing with
good.
a lot of students with pastoral problems, and looking after the pastoral side of the college and discipline and so on. So again, that was
Lovely.
kind of moving out of teaching a little bit and moving more into sort of management, really, which again was a really good experience.
And I think, if I'm right, you also, with your compassion, you also did, some therapy with people as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did a lot of counselling. I did a lot of counselling with students with mental health difficulties, and
Yeah.
that was very rewarding, and safeguarding, that kind of thing, which is really important now in schools.
Wow. So yeah, when did you leave St. Dominic's, Paul, and how did that feel? And what was the inner feeling there? How did you feel because how many years were you there again?
35, nearly 35, yeah, long
So
time.
most of your working teaching life in
Exactly.
the one venue.
Yes.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So you must have been very certainly revered, certainly loved by people who know you on a personal level. But how was that to step down?
It was a wrench, really, but there's a time, isn't there, for everything, and I got to 61, and I thought, yeah, now is a good time. COVID was hitting, and we were having lessons on Zoom and stuff like that, which was okay, but I just thought, yeah, I'm not gonna carry on. But yeah, it was hard to leave because it was such an important part of my life, and I still go back there, and I still do bits and pieces there, and it's great to go back, and
Good.
lots of fantastic colleagues.
Good. And was there anything you can pinpoint in your whole life, Paul, to share with the audience? Anything particular that happened either in Japan or over in the UK, or anything that sort of sparked this intensity that you have of commitment to your vocation and to this higher faith? I mean, you have one of the strongest faiths. Your mum, my nana Lily, always said Paul's faith is unbreakable, which is fantastic, and has served you very well. And you've got that 17% extra life expectancy on top of. But share with us what has helped you to keep that constitution and continue to help others.
Well, I think this might sound strange, Cathy, but one of the chapters in the book is doubt is our friend, and I think one of the things that I've had throughout my life, I suppose, is periods where doubt is there, and I think people get a little bit scared by doubt. They get a little bit scared that somehow this is unusual, or this is something that's maybe sinful, to doubt. Whereas my point is that doubt is essential
Yeah.
for spiritual growth,
Yeah.
and we see, I mean, this season of Easter, we see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane saying to the Father, if it's possible, take this away from me. There's your doubt. Good Friday, on the cross, Jesus says, why have you forsaken me? My God, why have you forsaken me? And so, this idea that somehow doubt is something that we run away from is that it's not a good philosophy to have. So I would say that doubt is essential, and sometimes faith is a bit like a sort of curve like this. We have to go down in order to come back up again. And so if I often say to people, if you're experiencing uncertainty, doubt, if you don't know if God exists or not, if you're unsure about your faith, then embrace it, welcome it, because that is essential if you're going to delve deeper into a spiritual connection. And so I think that is one of the things I would say to people, because I think far from being a sin, it's an essential prerequisite of spiritual growth. You've got to keep asking questions. We've got to keep questioning, which is why the organized churches in the past were wrong to say it's all about doctrines and rules and regulations, because that's about keeping control, that's about power, and that's about being right first and foremost. And there is and it's about winning, if you like. It's about
Yeah.
forcing people into a
Yeah.
mindset. Whereas actually we need to encourage people to start thinking for themselves and to start questioning, because that's what leads to personal growth, personal spiritual growth.
Yeah, because it's unarguable that love is the most valuable attribute that humans have, and obviously animals as well. I love animals very much, and connect. We should all definitely connect with wildlife and animals, and it's amazing. We're often indoctrinated to believe that they don't have a heart or a soul or whatever, or they don't feel pain. That's often a philosophized theory that has been disproven repeatedly. They absolutely do. And as you're quite rightly saying, if you're somebody watching today that perhaps has maybe not had a religious upbringing, that's important as well. So it's never been something that they've even thought about, or indeed the person who's had the very, very strict upbringing. And in particular my dad's day, I think it was all in Latin, so they didn't understand what was going on. Put your posh pants on up to your knees, pull your socks up to your knees, stand up straight, make sure your shoes look nice. And we often have an ego in many church forms. That's important to say as well. And stripping that back, when you do go into different churches and different religions, as you and I have done as well, you do see the message in the ones that strip everything back. We're talking in going in with your bare feet, etc. The religions that strip everything back. Whereas the Catholic Church, for me, sometimes was a little bit about image, and that sometimes can transcend a faith in the wrong direction. And what you're saying is strip all that back and get to the guts of what faith and Christianity and sharing this universe with each other, and the power of love and how it transcends. So over to you.
No, I think you're right, Cathy, and I think a lot of particularly Catholics suffer from sort of Catholic guilt, don't they? Particularly older Catholics, and it's a terrible thing, for the church to have instilled that into people, which is made them fearful. I mean, they're two powerful emotions in life, aren't they? Fear and love. And I think a lot of people went to church and professed belief in God out of fear in the past, and now that is, thank goodness that's changed, and people are kind of leaving that behind. But there's a narrow-mindedness very often, or there was in the past. I think things have changed now hugely, but there was a narrow-mindedness in the past. I think Pope Francis in the Catholic Church has done fantastic work in kind of getting rid of this kind of narrow-minded idea about things. But one of the things I mentioned in the book is about how some churches banned church halls being used for yoga, for example, because the vicar or the priest said that because obviously yoga is connected with Hinduism and Buddhism, they said that it would end up with Christians worshipping false gods, and they would forbid church halls from being used for yoga. And it's just an example of a kind of mindset.
A narrow-mindedness. And I think it all depends as well on who you get as your particular priest or Buddhist monk, or whomever is at the forefront of where you are. And I think that is so important, because whoever's preaching the message, as long as the message is love, as long as the message can be internalized and understood. We had a wonderful priest called Father Bernard, and he was very much like Eric Morecambe to me. He looked like Eric Morecambe, and I once, making him laugh, said, "Will you marry me one day?" And he didn't know what to say. So he was brilliant. And I have to say, in my youth, with my friends Helen Latham, Jennifer Woodburn, etc., in my youth at Our Lady's Catholic Church in Fulwood, Preston, I have to say he was the reason for me going. And we'd had old worldly different priests coming and going, but he was hip, if that's a word from the 60s that I still use today. He was modern, and he would walk onto what I call the stage, which is the altar, and he would get tripped up in his microphone and perhaps fall or something, and just carry on, and nothing had to be perfect. So there was no fear, because he allowed us to be free, and we would sing and play the organ and things like that at the front. And he encouraged the youth in this particular at this particular time, it was one of the strongest times where we had a lot of youth, including myself. I mean, it was more easy to pull older people because that was something that they just did religiously, literally religiously. But to get the youth involved, and I think that's something that we have to do today as well.
You know, Jesus said, "I've come to set you free and live life to the full." So I don't think that's a sacrifice. I think it's just embracing something which, you know, leads to a life where, you know,
It has meaning. I think you're saying a life that has meaning. Rather than, I think what I'm trying to do is tally up what some people would have I've spoken with who've said the sacrifice would be going to the cold dark church 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and that was perhaps something that. And then the glory is an hour later you can have tea and biscuits and maybe sausage rolls if the chef's in for the day. You know, the old fashioned feeling, but still transcending today, and children turning around because they don't understand the liturgy or that kind of thing. So is there a way today, Paul, that you think, you know, potentially with your skill set as well, do you think there's a way that you could educate priests that may be listening today or vicars to get that community spirit back that we very much lost in the lockdown time? Do you think there's anything valuable that you can share? Because your book, Doing Christianity, does highlight some very valuable tools that do transcend religion as the word religion. It's very much about community and spirit. Is there anything that you could guide, and so people don't feel like they are dragging feet to do X in order to achieve Y? That's what I meant by sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I do still talk to groups of young people, and you know, the way in, if people, you know, because people are worried, oh my goodness, young people aren't going to church anymore, or young people aren't believing in God anymore, etc., etc. And you know, the way in that I think really works is to talk about social justice, because you know, when you talk to young people about social justice issues, making the world a better place, making the world fairer, feeding the hungry, and so on, they're on board massively on board. You know, because young people really do see that, you know, racism, sexism, the fact that there's so much hunger in the world where there needn't be. You know, there's enough for everybody's, you know, need, but not enough for everyone's greed. You know, those are issues that really resonate with young people. And you know, the proof of the pudding is in the action, isn't it? It's in the eating. And I think if people can see that actually what Christ is saying is feed the hungry, what Christ is saying is look after widows and orphans. And if you do that, then you know you're opening doors for people. And you know, the best way to be a Christian is to, or to be religious, you know, is to help people. And I think young people often get turned off by the theology, and so you have to approach it in a slightly different way, which is what Jesus did. You know, he, as I said to you, his first sermon in the synagogue, he quotes Isaiah, you know, look after widows and orphans, and you know, so he's giving us this kind of template for teaching. You know, what's his most famous parable? It's the Good Samaritan. You know, it's all there. The Good Samaritan, everything is there about how we need to look after people. And so that's the way in, I think. And that's you know, that's if you say to a young person, do you want to go on a march to campaign for social justice or whatever, they will say yes. You know, ask them if they want to go to church, and they'll say, not really. So I think to some extent we've got to, and some churches are really doing this. You know, some churches have got food banks, they've got food, you know, for homeless, you know, soup kitchens and so on, and all that outreach is there. And that's really what we've got to go back to.
And I think that's really valuable, Paul, what you've just said. And I think that one of the most valuable things you've said is that, because it is about how to reach people. Now, you've spent your career doing that in the classroom, getting people to come together and asking them how they feel. Not every priest has the opportunity to do that because they are so busy, or every religious leader of any religion. So very often getting to know the community, asking people what they want, because time has changed, things have evolved, things have changed. Do you think there's a way to get the message back out and get people back into those links?
I mean, I think in terms of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis is trying really hard, to kind of reconnect with people, and especially young people. And some of the things he said about moving away from judgmentalism, which I think is always something that's bedeviled religious organizations, this holier than thou approach, this judgmentalism, and I think we've seen that, in the church with, the way that Pope Francis has spoken about gay rights, for example. He said, who am I to judge? And that's a massive shift in, the Catholic Church's position on that.
Huge.
And I mean, no young person's going to sign up for an organisation that is homophobic.
It's against any particular person or party. Absolutely.
So there's a lot of work to be done, and it's happening very slowly. But the spirit will move, and things will change. I'm absolutely certain of that. I think the churches will. I think the organised religion in the West is declining rapidly. I mean, if you look at the church, you go to a church and that you can count on one hand quite often the number of people sort of under 50. And so you think about the future generation. You think about 50
that's what I was meaning.
Now, there won't be any priests. There'll hardly be any priests. There'll be hardly any congregation, and things will have to change. So I think there will be some radical changes in the future, but I'll be dead there by then.
Don't say that. You drink from the fountain of eternal youth. If I can say to the audience that both you and I have in our 30s both been thought of as children. I was once picked up at my drama school almost. I was the teacher. I said to the lady, she said, would you like a lift, dear? I'm picking up my 16-year-old, and I was 32. And you also had Avon calling at the door, I believe. And they said to you, is your mum in?
Indeed, yeah. And I was in my 30s at the time, hilarious.
So we're quite blessed in that department, but certainly I think anybody watching is going to say there's no way that man's 61. So so genuinely, just to conclude today, Paul, what do you feel is your biggest message? And we'll go back and just show that everybody the book, Doing Christianity. Is there anything particularly that you want to transcend to everybody to learn from today?
I mean, one of the things I talk about, just to sort of sum up really, I talk about the difference between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. So the church and, traditionally has been obsessed, I would say, with orthodoxy. That's right beliefs, believing in the right things, that there is some body of thinking which is correct. Whereas I think Jesus is talking about orthopraxy, and orthopraxy means right practice, not right thinking or right beliefs, but right practice. And St. James sums this up by saying, if good works do not accompany faith, it is quite dead. If good works do not accompany faith, it is quite dead. And so, I think we have to move away from essentially a dead faith, a faith that relies on thinking certain things in certain ways, to a faith which is tolerant, it's open, it's exclusive, and it's saying to people, come on in. Christianity is something that anyone can do. It's not something which is only for the pious, the holy, those who go to church all the time. Jesus says, I've not come for you guys. Jesus says specifically, I've come for the sinner. What you say, Jesus is a doctor to a man as well. I've come for the sick man. I've come for the sinner. I've come for the doubter. I've come for someone who questions. And so really, we've got to move away from traditional ideas of and sometimes it's a painful process, because we all have ideas about who God is, and sometimes we make God in our own image and likeness, you know, and we've got to kind of step back a little bit, and we've got to accept that, you know, Christianity is something which is amazing. Following Christ is an amazing path to follow. It's a narrow path, but it's a path that leads to life and fulfillment and so on. And, you know, I would say to people, you know, give it a go. There's a bit in my book where I talk about an advert I saw for a pair of slippers, and they were supposed to be the comfiest slippers in the whole world. And basically you could buy these slippers, and if you didn't like them after a month or whatever, you could send them back and get a full refund. And I mean, hardly anybody, you know, would do that. They were confident of their product. Well, I would say to people who, you know, are not sure, you know, try following Christ for a month. You know, try being less judgmental, try being practicing forgiveness, try practicing love, try a bit of contemplation and meditation. Try thinking about life in a less materialistic way. And then if after a month, you know, everything's the same and you're bored stiff with it, then that's fine. But, you know, come and see, Jesus would say, come and see what it's like. And you can always hand it back after a month for you to get your old life back if you want.
Well, I think that sums it up beautifully. I think with the words "come and see," and I want the audience to come and see Doing Christianity by Paul Higginson. And I think it's been an exceptional talk with you today, Paul, and a very holistic healing chat as well. And I think that you've got an incredibly valuable insight of a lifetime of wisdom. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today's podcast. So thank you very much, Paul, and I wish you all the very best ahead. And I hope that we have figures like you in our future who, you know, who are able to reach larger communities and maybe bring all the qualities that you've described today into a future of faith. And thank you very much indeed for your time today. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Cathy. It's been fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity.
Wonderful.
Bye now.
Lots of love. Bye bye, Paul. Bye bye.